and welcome to the Zest, the official podcast of Orange Coast Magazine. I'm Chelsea Ranieri, and I am so excited to introduce today's guest. She is the best-selling and award-winning author of more than 20 novels, including the international blockbuster The Nightingale, my personal favorite, Firefly Lane, which became a Netflix series, and her most recently released book, The Women. Thank you so much for being here today, Kristin Hannah.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Of course. I was first introduced to your books through a book club that I'm in. Shout out to the book club. And I just completely fell in love with your writing and the characters. And in fact, one of our members named her daughter after your character, Lenny. So we are big fans, to say the least.
Wow, that is so exciting. Tell her thank you. I appreciate that.
I will. So yeah, I've been very excited to get to talk with you, but I would love to start from the beginning of your story. And you lived in Garden Grove until third grade. And then in 1968, your dad took your family and a few friends on a road trip. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, third grade, 1968, and we were a Southern California family, and my dad has always been an adventurer. He was born in Saskatchewan, and so came down to the U.S. to play hockey, and he's always gone where nobody else went, and so he started to feel in 1968 like Southern California had traffic that was unbearable, and so off we went in this Volkswagen bus, and the idea was that we kids and mom would know home when we saw it. So we ended
Wow.
up going through something like 16 states, and we all pretty much raised our hand in the Pacific Northwest. There was just something about it that really spoke to us. And so I've been there ever since. My dad has, of course, he went on to Alaska and Costa Rica and other
Wow.
adventurous locations.
And your family has strong ties to Alaska. Is that right?
We do actually. In the late 70s, my father decided that the Pacific Northwest was filling up and our traffic was getting bad, and so off he went north to Alaska with my mom, and they ended up building what would become our family business, which is the Great Alaska Adventure Lodge, and that was really the book, and my connection to Alaska and my love for Alaska is what led me to write the book, The Great Alone, a couple of years ago.
Awesome. And you went to school to study law originally. What initially drew you to that major?
Um, I've never known for sure why it was I picked law as a graduate degree, but it turned out to be a really good fit for me in a lot of ways. Obviously, the law is a lot of reading and a lot of writing. And I didn't know, of course, that I had, any writing talent, but I knew that writing came easily, and that organizing my thoughts and researching were things that I enjoyed doing. And then I discovered that, the law could be very creative as well. So it turned out to be a really great fit for me until I had my son, and I pretty much decided to take a few years to be an at-home mom.
Mhm.
And that's when I started writing.
Wow. And what initially sparked you to write? What inspired you for your first story?
Well, back when I was in law school, my mother was coming to the end of her battle with breast cancer. This is decades later, this is the inspiration for Firefly Lane.
Oh,
And so we were talking one day, my mom and I, and she said, I think you're going to be a writer. And it was such a bizarre thought because I'd never, shown any interest in that. And she said, in these weeks that I've got left, we should write a novel together. And that was really the beginning. After classes, I would, go to the library and Xerox pages and pages and pages of research and bring it back to my mom's hospital room. And we sort of just imagined this historical romance novel that she really wanted to write. And it wasn't until years later when I was pregnant with my son and I had a difficult pregnancy. I was bedridden for a long time, that I sort of pulled all these pages back out, and there was this, this material that was waiting like a gift from my mom. And I thought, okay, now is the moment. I've got nothing to do. I am going to try this writing thing and see if I can make it work. And here we are.
Wow. So you had no formal training in writing. You just kind of, how did you approach it?
Well, because I was bedridden, of course, I couldn't do what was natural to me, which is go back to school, take classes, and that's what I would have liked to have done, but I couldn't. And so what I did instead was I had a very extensive library, of course, as a voracious reader. And so I got several of my favorite novels, and I kind of deconstructed them, and just tried to teach myself what a novel was. And then I think with just the confidence of youth, I just thought, how hard can this be? I'm just gonna do it. And of course it turns out the answer is hard, very hard. And I didn't end up having any talent out of the gate. And so it took a long time, but I did discover from the very beginning that I loved the process of writing. And one of the things that's important, if you've got listeners who are aspiring writers, the trick sometimes is just to have this confidence and to dive in and to not give up. You just have to keep believing in yourself, even when not only are the odds stacked against you, but the evidence coming across your desk seems to be that you will never get there. And
that must have been really discouraging, I imagine.
It was. But the writing, the process of writing it, and people know this just, I think, on their own. It's why journaling is so important, and so effective. Just the process of writing, of giving into your imagination and spending time in that kind of a headspace is really valuable, whether you ever sell anything or become a published writer or not.
Yeah. And was that book that you first wrote with your mom, did that become published?
No. It was a terrible idea, but it took me 2 years to figure that out. And so by the end of the 2-year period, I had written and rewritten and fixed and clipped and changed this idea so much that I realized that I was now a better writer than this idea, and I needed an idea that gave me a better chance of actually succeeding. And so I put it all in a box. It's in my closet with a note on it that says, please do not publish even after my death. So
what was the first book that you ended up publishing?
I wrote the book I started after that, actually, was a book about a woman who goes north for the Klondike Gold Rush in Alaska. I think it was 1898 was the gold rush. And they literally, spent a lot of time walking to get into, carrying stoves on their backs and everything they owned. And so, of course, I kind of started in Alaska and then came back to it, 30 years later.
Wow. So what initially drew you to historical fiction?
Well, my mom and I both had a love of history, and she was a big reader of historical romance back in that time period. And so I think that's sort of how it started. But how I came back, to historical fiction, first, I think, was with a book called Winter Garden, and then, of course, most dramatically with The Nightingale. And that was really me reaching an age where I started looking, instead of at the issues of the women of my generation and the women of my age, which I had kind of focused on, year by year as I grew older, writing about, wifehood, motherhood, sisterhood, staying at home, working, all the various pressures that are on women in my generation and in general. I started looking later at women in history,
Mm.
and I started realizing and discovering all of the fabulous and amazing women's historical stories that have been simply lost or marginalized or forgotten. And it became kind of a quest for me to unearth some of these stories and put them out there so that my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter, so that women coming up are taught and are aware of the strength and resilience of women.
I love that. And how do you find a story that you want to eventually write about from history?
Well, it was fairly, I mean, the first two times with both Winter Garden, which was set in World War II Russia, and The Nightingale, which is World War II France, discovering simply what women were doing. In the Winter Garden was set in what was then Leningrad, and Leningrad during the war was cut off from the mainland and became this city of women and children. And I thought, none of us know this. There's just, and so little of those stories had gotten out under Stalin. So it was a very lost story, and it was deeply dramatic and just heartbreaking. And in the research for that one, I came across the story of a young woman named Andre Dujong, who at 19, I think, started one of the first escape routes out of Nazi occupied France for downed airmen. And here's this young woman, saving these men, walking over the Pyrenees Mountains in her little espadrilles, and risking her life on a daily basis to save people. And I was angry because, with all of my knowledge of history and all of my reading about World War II, I had never read this story. And so that's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that is sort of world changing in some way, that I feel I should have been taught in school, and I was not. And shines a light at the same time on women and their courage.
And how did you develop your characters?
Well, I mean, it's a book by book
Mm.
thing, but generally what it is I figure out what it is I have to say about the time period. For example, in The Women, which is
Mm.
about
Yes.
the young nurses, not all young, but the nurses who served in Vietnam during the war. I begin doing the research on the real women, and I read the stories of what actually happened to them and what transpired and how they were treated and all of that. And then my job is to tell a story that really truly represents them and feels authentic and feels true, even though it's fictional. And I create the characters that are really most like the women who served.
Wow. And you mentioned that you love the writing process. What is your favorite stage of the process? And also, how has it changed from what you were initially doing to what you do now?
Let's see, my favorite part of the process, bar none, is editing.
Oh, really?
What I love is I've taken however long, it usually takes about a year to research, and then it takes about a year to write the first draft. And
Wow.
all of that is very exploratory. I never know exactly where I'm going, even though I have a very detailed outline, but I just kind of keep molding and molding and molding. And when I get to the point where the book is coming together and I can really feel it,
Mm.
then the job is to sort of sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, scene by scene, turn it into the very best version of itself. That I love. I just love doing that. My
Yeah.
least favorite part of the process is choosing an idea and choosing the book that I'm going to spend, 3 years on, because I'm, I just, for whatever reason, that does not come easily to me.
No way. I would literally never know that with how incredible your books are.
thank you.
Uh,
They don't start out incredible, believe me.
so how has your writing process changed? And can you kind of just, you kind of laid it out a little bit, but can you give it a little more detail about what your writing process looks like?
Sure. Well, first of all, I still write longhand on my yellow legal pads.
Wow.
Um, which means really that I can write anywhere. And I do. I write outside, I write on the beach, I write in winter in my living room next to the fireplace. So it's a very hands-on kind of thing for me. And, in the early days, as I said earlier, I started writing as a new mother.
Mhm.
And so the first couple of books that I wrote were during nap time. So I, put my son down and then I would race to, start writing whatever I was going to write for the hour and a half that I had that day. And when you write like that, you end up, doing a lot of thinking time. And then when you sit down to write, you really have to be disciplined and you have to actually do what you think you're going to do. So my writing was very structured then. It was very plan oriented, and and I wrote the book I set out to write. And then, over the years, it has changed as I've, gotten more and more time to write. And once I started writing the really bigger historical novels and taking longer, I find that, like I said, I do this, extensive research, and I put everything on note cards, and I organize my note cards, based on whether I think I'll use them, so that I always have my research at my fingertips. And then I do a very detailed outline that explains what the whole book is going to be, beginning, middle, and end.
Wow.
And then I sit down and write it, and I usually get to about a page 100, and it blows apart in some, dramatic and depressing way.
Mhm.
And that's when I really begin following less about what I intended to write and more about what's working at the moment. And I let sort of my theme guide me.
That's so interesting. I've actually heard other authors say that around page 100 is where things start to change.
Yeah. Well, because the thing about any project, and this is another point for aspiring writers, the beginning tends to be very set in your head. You spend a lot of time thinking about the beginning, the beginning, the beginning. And about it, for me, a page 100 is the end of the beginning. And that's when the book needs to then evolve into what is going to be, the middle. And that's when a lot of young writers kind of give up and decide, hey, I'll start something else that's more interesting because this is really hard right here. And that's, I think, when you have to buckle down and find your way, however it is you have to do that.
How often do your outlines start to change after page 100?
Always.
Oh, really? Wow.
And I end up throwing away hundreds of pages because I don't realize sometimes that it changed 150 pages ago, or I get where I'm going and I don't like it. And I have to, so I keep starting over.
Is that frustrating when you have to start over? Or
Well, like I said, I like the editorial process.
Mm,
So I would rather start over than muscle through. And I guess,
right.
everybody has their own way of doing it, but I'd rather just like clear the table and start in on what's really working and follow that than I would constantly trying to fix something that doesn't feel organically right.
Definitely. And how do you know when a book is completed? I feel like that would probably be really hard to come to.
I mean, I can tell you this, I say I'm done when my deadline hits
Okay.
because I would keep writing forever. I love that part of the process, and I love, just, making it better and better. But the truth is, you get to a point where you begin to realize that you are making changes that are inconsequential,
Mhm.
and that's when you're just biding your time. And I think for me and for a lot of writers, it's a lot better and more entertaining to keep working on the book you're working on than it is to realize that you need to a new idea and you have to start on something else.
So true. So struggle and adversity are really common in your books. What about hardships do you find important to include?
I think that in fiction, like in life, adversity reveals character.
Mhm.
Adversity tells us who we are. Adversity shapes us. And I think that one of the things that at least I enjoy about fiction is the idea that you can learn from people, that you can watch people or characters stumble and fall and fail and pick themselves back up to try again. And I think that's really one of the most important lessons in life.
Mhm.
Um, in most things, you only fail if you quit or give up. And it's so important to me to show women, our strength, our durability, our grit. And I think a lot of the ways in which women show courage are not valued as heroic endeavors. It's one thing to sort of be in a war and claim a hill or, those sorts of things. And sometimes, the strongest thing a woman can do is to be there for her child when she's terrified.
Mhm.
And so I like to show all of those variations of women's bravery.
Yeah, which era has been your favorite to write about?
This 60s and 70s was really fun. I remember it from my youth. I wasn't old enough to go to war or anything, but I do remember the division of the era. And of course, we all remember the fashion and the music. And so that was a really fun era to write about.
Wow, and do you have any favorite, characters or a favorite book that you've written?
My favorite book, at the moment is The Women, and my favorite
Oh!
character is Frankie. Prior to this, the two real favorites were The Nightingale and Firefly Lane, and I think there's a real there's some connective tissue between Firefly Lane and The Women because of the 60s and the 70s and women coming of age over a long period of time. So maybe I just like that.
Yeah. Ooh, I can't wait to read The Women. That's our book club for next month.
Yay! Good
I
for
know, I
you.
was excited. So you mentioned Firefly Lane. I'm also mentioned that was like that's my all-time favorite book, and I have never cried harder. I was sobbing so hard, I literally took a picture of it and sent it to my sister and was like, "You need to read this book." Um, but I read that, that is one of your most personal and autobiographical books. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so the characters, Kate and Tully, are the same age that I am. They grew up in the town that I grew up in. Kate grew up in the house that I grew up in. They went to the University of Washington. They joined my sorority. They got their degrees in communications, which is what my degree is in. And so there was just a lot of overlap, and a lot of my memories of middle school and high school and college and young motherhood that came to play in Firefly Lane. And of course, there was the music and there
Mhm.
was the fashion and all the moments that mattered to me. And then, of course, overlaying all of that is Firefly Lane is the book where I was 40 and I finally went in search of my mother. I just felt this, missing of her so much when I hit 40. And the only way really for me to find her was to imagine her and to try to look at, you know, her breast cancer, which was so impactful to me as a young person, and to try to see what it was like from her perspective because I was just too young to think about that at the time. And so it was the story of Kate and her daughter Mara are really my mom and I in a lot of different ways and a lot of different versions. And interestingly enough, I didn't realize at the time, but I learned afterwards that I started the book at exactly the age she was when she was diagnosed with breast cancer,
Wow.
and I finished it at exactly the age she was when she died.
Oh my God, that gave me chills.
I
Ah,
know, I just
wow.
felt like she was like she was there beside me all the time.
And I love that she thought that you would be a writer and then that all came to that's such a nice full circle moment. Um, so your latest novel, as we touched on, The Women, is centered on a woman who goes to war in Vietnam. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, so I was a child during the Vietnam War.
Mhm.
And as I said earlier, I really remember, I always remembered the anger, the chaos, the division, the protests, what was going on in my youth. It cast a big shadow across my youth. And we all watched the news then. It was the same news. We had three channels. Walter Cronkite told us what was going on. We believed everything, he said. And my best girlfriend, when I was, I guess, 10, her father served in Vietnam and was
Oh,
shot down and was
oh,
missing. And so in those days, we wore these prisoner of war bracelets, and it had the serviceman's name and the date that he was lost. And the idea was that you wore these in remembrance until he came home. And so my guy never came home. And so I wore this bracelet for years and years and years. And it meant that him and his loss was always, sort of front and center in my life. And then of course I saw later how the Vietnam vets were treated when they came home, and that made a big impression on me. So I wanted to write this book for years and years. And I first submitted an idea set in the Vietnam era to my editor in 1997. And she very wisely said, Kristin, you aren't old enough and the world's not ready for this story yet.
huh.
And so why don't you wait and, do something else? And so I did. I waited. And every couple of years I would think back and think, is this the moment? Am I ready to do it? Do I want to, tackle Vietnam right now? And I kept waiting and waiting. And then in March of 2020, when we in Seattle were on lockdown,
Mhm.
I was watching the news and seeing what was going on in the country, the anger, the chaos, the turbulence, and it all felt very Vietnam era again to me.
Wow.
And so that made me start thinking, I wonder if Vietnam is relevant again now. I wonder if this is my opening. And then I was watching the nurses and the doctors who were the front line of the pandemic. And, they were not being supported the way I felt they should in a lot of instances. I knew how hard they were working and I knew what they were sacrificing. We all did. And so that's when it all sort of came together to me, the nurses and Vietnam. And I thought, this is the perfect time for this story.
Wow, I can't wait to read it. What do you hope readers walk away with after reading it?
The book is very much about, I guess, remembrance and gratitude, and a reminder of the importance of treating our veterans with respect and taking care of them when they come home. And so I think, those are some of the most important things. These women and the men, frankly, but the women who served in Vietnam have been so forgotten by history. People don't even, know that they served. And these women are, in their mid to late 70s or 80s. And I just think it's so important that the world is reminded of their service and has the moment to say thank you while we can.
I saw that you got to speak to a lot of the veterans.
I have, and what I really loved was last November, I went to Washington D.C.
Mhm.
with Diane Carlson Evans, who wrote a book called Healing Wounds that was amazing about her experience as an Army nurse,
Wow.
and is the founder of the Women's Vietnam Memorial. And so going back there for Veterans Day, I got to see, all of these women come together, many of them for the first time in decades. And it was such a powerful moment to see them drawn together and hugging and listen to their stories as they talked, next to their own memorial.
Wow. I also read that this might be a movie. Is that?
Well, Warner Brothers is working fast and furiously on
Oh
it.
my gosh.
So I'm fingers crossed. Yeah, I feel really good about this one.
Amazing. And is there another book of yours that's supposed to be a movie as well soon?
Well, The Nightingale is in production, pre-production, I guess they call it. And I'm hoping that after being shut down by the pandemic and then the writer's strike and then, the actors strike, we are all really hopeful that the Nightingale is going to finally soar into theaters this year.
Oh my gosh, that'd be amazing. And that's Dakota and Elle Fanning, is that right?
I think that's who they've got right now. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that'd be incredible.
Yeah.
So in addition to everything that we've talked about, you have such an incredible career. What can listeners look forward to next? Or is there anything you want to call out?
I wish I knew what people I told you that, ideas are the worst part for me. And honestly, I'm just having such a moment here with the women because getting the chance to talk to veterans and to hear their story and to pass their story along and just to be a part of raising awareness has been such a gift that I'm kind of letting myself focus on.
So we're coming to the end of our time, but before I let you go, I have three final questions for you. We call
Okay.
them the thoughtful three. So first, what advice do you have for someone whose dreams feel out of reach right now?
I think dreams always feel out of reach. That's sort of, I think, the genesis. And so you have to accept that that is part of it. And going after one's dreams require the confidence to go against the grain and to do something that does feel out of reach. So I would say, first of all, have the confidence and the belief in yourself to dare to have that dream and to dare to move towards it. And then most importantly, that journey, whatever that looks like, whatever your dream is, there is a first step. And, that's the way it works. You take the first step and you settle in and you face your fears once again, because with every step, the fear gets bigger
Yeah,
because you're taking more risk. The more you risk, the more you fear. And so you let that fear in, you push it aside, and then you take the second step and you just keep going.
definitely. And then what would you say to someone who's listening right now who is an aspiring author but doesn't know where to start?
Again, you just have to start writing. I mean, obviously, the very beginning is
Mm.
read everything you can, read genres and kinds of stories that don't necessarily appeal to you, to find out what your natural sort of inclination is. And then just understand that there's a huge learning curve
Mm.
and there's no place for perfectionism. There's no place for demanding the very best of yourself. The idea simply has to be that you make the decision, you embrace the fear, you begin writing. Even if you can tell your writing isn't good, you keep writing and keep writing, and you get someone, to read it, and it's just this process. You just keep pressing forward and learning your craft.
Ah, I love that. And then lastly, what are three books that you feel everyone should read?
Ah, To Kill a Mockingbird,
Mhm.
Harper Lee. Uh, I, you know, I'm just gonna have to say Lord of the Rings
Yeah,
because
really?
I can't help myself. the good versus evil, the friendship, the camaraderie, the fantasy, the imagination. It has been sort of my go-to since childhood, actually.
Wow.
And I'm going to say, let's go with Sense and Sensibility, Jane Austen.
Amazing. My husband's going to be thrilled that you said the Lord of the Rings. So
I'm not the only geek girl.
Yeah, exactly. Huh? Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time. I cannot wait to share this with my book club.
Well, thank you. I hope you guys love it.
Thanks.